Let me tell you what I read in May. I know it's July, but you know, things have happened, so stay tuned. Let me get comfortable. Okay, I am at a train station in Toronto. So yes, hi, welcome back to Onyx Pages. Thank you to those of you who have been sticking around with me for a while. Thanks also to those of you who are new. Welcome to the Onyx Pages family. All right, so May was a really interesting month. It was my birth month. I had a birthday, and a lot of the time was spent I spend my birthday months in reflection. I'm curious, how do you spend your birthdays? Like, I sort of think about the things that I accomplished in the year before. I do a lot of journaling. I think about my goals for the year ahead. It's sort of like my New Year. So it was an interesting time, and of course it was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and all sorts of other things because we were socially isolating at that point, which meant that I got some reading done, more than I did in March, and I think maybe more than I did in April, but let me just get into what I read. So the first book that I read, or either read or finished, was The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, and I read that in part because I had finished reading, because I was reading the graphic novel as well as the I did a side-by-side read of the graphic novel as well as the prose. What do you call the non-graphic adaptation? Well, that one. So I read both at the same time, which made it a particularly a slower than usual read, but I did that because I was going to be interviewing John Jennings and Damien Duffy, and I wanted to get through the book and really do it in a way that would allow me to ask them interview questions that were interesting and based on what they did. So I did that, and I really enjoyed The Parable of the Sower. There's rumbling going on. And of course, The Parable of the Sower, if you're not familiar, is one of Octavia Butler's famous novels, most famous novels. It's part of the parables duology, and it consists of The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. And so this tells the story of Lauren Olamina, who lives in a small gated community called Robledo, at a time when there was a lot of political and financial unrest, and she had to flee her little gated community. She's 17 at the time, in order to find a safer place to live, and along the way she develops this religion called Earthseed that she started to put together in her mind at age 12, and she also collected a bunch of people who formed a part of this community. The graphic novel was lush and beautiful, very classic John Jennings and Damien Duffy. I have a much greater appreciation for it now that I have had an opportunity to hear them talk about what they've done, and also there have been so many great live discussions about Parable of the Sower. I have 10 minutes before my train comes. Okay. The next book I read was Dragon Pearl, or The Dragon's Pearl, written by Yoon-Ha Lee. I read this because I was one of the judges for the BookTube SFF Awards, and it was one of the selections for the middle grade book. It was interesting in terms of the world building. You follow a young character who is trying to solve the mystery of why her brother did not return from this military academy in space, and she's a fox spirit, so I got to learn a little bit about the magical system, and it was cute in places. I won't say that I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it was a good ride, and there were definitely parts of the story where I felt, wow, this is pretty cool, and I like following this character along. And I definitely liked the cultural elements. There's a lot of Korean culture in terms of food and family relationships and things like that. But what really I struggled with was the voice. I felt that the voice of the main character was inconsistent. Sometimes she sounded like and acted like an 11-year-old, and sometimes she was far more sophisticated than that. It was so disjointed that it was actually distracting to read. But I mean, there were a lot of redeeming qualities to it, and I understand that Yoon-ha Lee, that was the first middle grade title written by the author, so it may be that it'll change, but you could sort of tell that this author mainly writes for adults. The third book that I read was The Jumbies, written by Tracy Baptiste, and that was a story that follows a main character living in an island that looks like Trinidad, that feels like Trinidad, and there's a lot of spirits and monsters and otherworldly beings that coexist with the human beings who live in this little village. The main character, she lives with her father. Her mother passed away, and she has like these, well, I don't want to spoil it too much because I know many of you care about spoilers, so she has to spend time walking through the woods, and she plays in the woods sometimes, and when she does, she feels the presence of another being, and believes that her town has been put under threat by this being, and so she and her friends try to find out what it is, what the being wants, what the being's history is, and they do what people do when they find out that there's a threat. They try to beat it. So it's a thrilling, cute, sweet story with a lot of interesting references to Caribbean folklore. There are, I really like stories that involve magical creatures and animals, and there are a lot of those in the story as well. And of course, The Jumbies has a black mermaid element to it, so that, not so much in the first story, but that was really cool for me to see. So I'm really interested in the ways that that West African cosmologies like Ifa, for example, are taken up in Caribbean literature. So this was one of the first stories that I read, written for a middle grade audience, that take up magic in this way, West African magical folklore and Caribbean folklore in this way. I enjoyed The Jumbies. It was the first in a trilogy, so I own the other two books and I will eventually read them. The final book that I started it in May, and I believe I finished it in June, and that was Joplin's Ghost by Tananarive Due. That was quite a ride. Tananarive Due, if you haven't had an opportunity yet to read her writing, she's primarily a horror writer. She has a series called the African Immortals series, which consists of 4 or 5 vampire books. She also has a nonfiction book that she wrote with her mother. Her mother was very active in the civil rights movement, so they co-wrote, I think it's like a political autobiography. She is married to Stephen Barnes, who is a science fiction and horror writer, so they've written some work together. And also Stephen Barnes, Tananarive Due, and Blair Underwood came together to write some romance novels. So, but the stuff that she writes on her own is horror / spec fic, and I've read some of her vampire books, but I haven't read them in order. Oh, my train is coming. So I have to read them in order, so I'm probably going to do a reread of that. But Joplin's Ghost tells the story of Phoenix, who's a young R&B singer who finds herself wrapped up in a relationship with a ghost, the ghost of Scott Joplin, who is a ragtime performer like many years prior. So the story is about her trying to figure out like why that ghost is there and what to do with that ghost. Okay, my train's here, so I will tell you more in a sec. So I think I may have talked to you about this book before. This is turning into a vlog. It wasn't meant to be a vlog of my commute, but here we are. So in Joplin's Ghost, we follow Phoenix. Phoenix is in her early 20s and she is a singer. She likes singing, I think, sort of more folksy type music, but her father really wanted her to make it big. So in order to please her father, she signed with this like hip hop label and decided to like ditch her folksy band and instead become a solo artist who sings like R&B pop. Her soul's not in it, but there it is. Anyway, so one day she goes and visits Joplin House, which is a small museum about the ragtime performer and composer Scott Joplin. And while she's there, she has this experience, and she continues to having these really strange experiences as the story goes on. And we learn, and this is not a spoiler because it's written on the back, but we learn that the ghost of Scott Joplin is somehow haunting her for some reason. The cool thing about the book, I think that this is very classic Tananarive Due. A lot of her books, no matter what the genres are, like the main genres, now in French. Okay, let's see how long I have before the next announcement. But in classic Tananarive Due style, there's a lot of history. So whatever book you read, you're going to find out about the time that she's written about. She is a relentless historian and researcher. So you learn a lot about the civil rights movement because Phoenix's father was a part of it. You learn a lot about jazz history and the experiences of African American performers in the, I think, 20s, 30s, 40s, I want to say. But anyway, so there's a lot of that. It was a pleasure to read. It was quite long. It was over 400 pages, but I definitely enjoyed it and would recommend it to you if you are interested in horror that has that kind of historical element to it. And I read those. I mean, I enjoyed what I read for the month of May. I'm happy with the selection, and that is my wrap up as far as books are concerned. I can't remember anything else. Okay, so this is probably where I'm going to end this video. Thank you very much for watching. That is what I read in May. Please let me know what you read in the month of May if you can remember that far back. And have you read any of the books that I've read? Are you interested in any of those books? Let's talk about that in the description, in the chat below. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, I would like you to send a cute little dog. Can you do that? Can you post a canine, any kind of dog emoticon in the comments? I would appreciate that. Is there anything else I want to tell you? Oh yes, as you know, at the end of each video I will shout out a new booktuber, and this time I want to shout out Jeraine, who is the mastermind behind Rebel Women Book Club, Rebel Women Lit Book Club, which is, according to her, the best book club, which she will tell you that in her newbie booktube tag. She created a tag for book clubs. So I will put probably at the end of this video, there'll be a little picture that you can click on that will take you right to her first video. So welcome to booktube, Rebel Women Lit Club, and that is it. Remember to read with purpose. I will see you soon and stay safe. Okay, bye.